The morning sun cast long shadows across the embassy courtyard as Guard Captain Marcus Williams adjusted his ceremonial uniform for the third time. The red fabric gleamed under the early light, every button polished to perfection, every crease sharp enough to cut paper. He had served the British Royal Guard for 12 years, and in all that time today felt different somehow. There was tension in the air that he couldn't quite explain, like the electric feeling before a thunderstorm. The British embassy in Beijing was preparing for what Ambassador Richardson had called one of the most important diplomatic meetings in recent memory. High-ranking officials from both countries would be present, and security was tighter than usual. Marcus had been handpicked for this assignment because of his exemplary record and unwavering dedication to protocol. His commanding officer, Colonel James Hartwell, had pulled him aside just yesterday. "Williams," Colonel Hartwell had said, his weathered face serious. "Tomorrow's meeting could shape British-Chinese relations for the next decade. I'm putting you in charge of ceremonial security because I know you won't let politics interfere with duty. You follow protocol exactly as written, no matter what anyone says or does. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Marcus had replied, though he wondered why such specific instructions were necessary now. As he walked through the embassy halls at dawn, Marcus noticed the nervous energy of the staff. Secretary Helen Morrison was reorganizing the same stack of papers for the fourth time, her usually steady hands trembling slightly. Junior diplomat Peter Chen checked his phone repeatedly, muttering under his breath about delicate situations and cultural sensitivities. Even the usually unflappable Ambassador Richardson seemed on edge. Pacing his office and speaking in hushed tones with his senior advisors, Marcus paused outside the ambassador's office, catching fragments of conversation through the partially open door. Double quotes, ... Absolutely. Crucial that nothing goes wrong today. Double quotes. Double quotes. Colonel Zhang has a reputation for being difficult. ... One small mistake could derail months of negotiations. ... The pieces of conversation painted a picture of high stakes and diplomatic fragility. Marcus straightened his shoulders and continued his patrol. His job was simple in theory but complex in execution. Maintain security and follow the strict ceremonial protocols that had been drilled into him since his first day of service. No matter how important the meeting, no matter how delicate the politics, his duty remained unchanged. The Chinese delegation was expected to arrive within the hour. Marcus had studied the guest list carefully the night before, memorizing faces, names, and ranks. Among them was Colonel Zhang Wei, a decorated military officer with over 25 years of service. The intelligence briefing had described him as highly professional but known for testing the limits of diplomatic courtesy. Zhang had served in multiple international peacekeeping missions and was respected even by his adversaries for his tactical brilliance and unwavering dedication to Chinese military values. What the briefing hadn't mentioned, but what Marcus had learned through his own research, was that Colonel Zhang had a reputation for what some called character assessments. Stories circulated in military circles about how Zhang would unexpectedly test foreign officers, pushing them to see how they responded under pressure. Some said these tests were unofficial ways of evaluating potential allies or enemies. Others believed Zhang simply couldn't resist challenging anyone who claimed to be a professional soldier. Marcus positioned himself at the main entrance, his posture perfect and his expression neutral, the morning light streaming through the embassies. Tall windows illuminated the marble floors and expensive artwork that decorated the diplomatic building. Everything about the space spoke of careful attention to detail and respect for protocol. His fellow guards took their positions around the building, each one aware of the importance of this day. Sergeant David Thompson, a veteran with 15 years of service, nodded respectfully as he passed. "Big day today, Captain," Thompson said quietly. "Word is, this meeting could affect trade deals worth billions of pounds." Marcus nodded but didn't reply. He had learned long ago that a royal guard must remain composed regardless of the situation, whether facing an angry crowd, a security threat, or apparently a diplomatic meeting that could reshape international relations. The embassy's head of security, James Morton, approached Marcus with final instructions. Morton was a former SAS operative who had transitioned to diplomatic security after retiring from active military service. His experience in high-stress situations made him invaluable during important events like today's meeting. "Remember," Captain Morton said quietly, checking his watch and scanning the courtyard. "Today's meeting could impact relations between our countries for years to come. The trade agreements being discussed are worth more money than most small countries see in a decade. Everything must go perfectly. Follow protocol exactly as you've been trained, but be prepared for ... unexpected situations." Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. "Unexpected situations, sir?" Morton hesitated, as if debating how much to reveal. "Our intelligence suggests that Colonel Zhang likes to test people, push boundaries, see how foreign military personnel react under pressure. It's not officially sanctioned by Beijing, but it happens. If something unusual occurs, stick to protocol no matter what. Don't let anyone pressure you into compromising your standing orders." The warning sent a chill down Marcus's spine, but he nodded silently. He understood the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. In just a few minutes, he would face whatever test awaited him with the same dedication that had carried him through 12 years of exemplary service. The sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the courtyard, the low rumble of expensive engines announcing the arrival of the diplomatic convoy. Marcus straightened his shoulders and prepared to greet the visitors with the respect and dignity that his position demanded. He had no idea that in just a few moments, he would be forced to make a decision that would shock everyone present and test the very foundation of international diplomatic protocol. 3 black Mercedes sedans pulled up to the entrance in perfect formation, their diplomatic flags fluttering in the morning breeze. The lead vehicle's door opened and Colonel Zhang Wei stepped out, his Chinese military uniform immaculate and decorated with ribbons that spoke of a distinguished career. The colonel's posture was ramrod straight, his movements precise and controlled. When his eyes met Marcus's, there was an intensity there that suggested today's meeting would push the boundaries of diplomatic courtesy in ways that no one had anticipated. The other vehicles disgorged additional Chinese officials. Diplomats in expensive suits, junior military officers in crisp uniforms, and security personnel whose alert eyes immediately began scanning the embassy building and grounds. But Colonel Zhang's attention remained fixed on Marcus, studying the British Guard with the calculating gaze of a professional soldier evaluating a potential opponent. As the delegation assembled at the embassy entrance, Marcus felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. Whatever was about to happen, he knew that his response would reflect not only on himself but on every royal guard who had served before him. The stage was set for a confrontation that would leave the embassy staff speechless and create ripples that would be felt in both London and Beijing for months to come. Colonel Zhang Wei stepped out of the lead vehicle with military precision that spoke of decades of training and discipline. His Chinese uniform was a masterpiece of military tailoring, decorated with ribbons and medals that told the story of a distinguished career spanning multiple continents and conflicts. The morning sun caught the polished brass of his rank insignia, while his leather boots gleamed like black mirrors. Behind him, 3 junior officers followed in perfect formation, their movements sharp and coordinated like dancers performing a well-rehearsed routine. The colonel's eyes immediately fixed on Captain Marcus Williams with an intensity that made several embassy staff members shift uncomfortably in the background. It wasn't the casual glance of a visiting dignitary acknowledging security personnel. It was the focused attention of a predator sizing up potential prey. Marcus felt the weight of that gaze, but maintained his professional composure, standing at perfect attention as he had been trained to do. The formal introductions began exactly as planned. Ambassador Richardson, resplendent in his best diplomatic suit, greeted the Chinese delegation with the practiced warmth of a career diplomat. His smile was genuine, but carefully measured, conveying respect without subservience. The exchange of pleasantries followed the familiar rhythm of international diplomacy: comments about the weather, inquiries about the journey, expressions of mutual respect and anticipation for productive discussions. Colonel Zhang Ambassador Richardson said, with practiced diplomacy. "It's an honor to welcome you to our embassy. I trust your flight was comfortable?" "Quite satisfactory, Ambassador," the colonel replied in accented but perfectly clear English. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Your embassy is impressive. A worthy representation of British dignity." The other members of the Chinese delegation nodded politely, following their superior's lead in the delicate dance of diplomatic courtesy. Junior diplomats from both sides exchanged business cards and pleasantries, while translators stood ready to assist with any communication difficulties that might arise. Marcus stood at attention. Nearby, following standard protocol for such occasions. His role was clear: maintain a visible security presence while remaining unobtrusive enough not to interfere with diplomatic proceedings. He had performed this duty dozens of times before, and everything seemed to be proceeding normally until Colonel Jung suddenly broke away from the diplomatic group. The change was so abrupt that it caught everyone off guard. One moment the colonel was engaged in polite conversation with Ambassador Richardson about the beautiful architecture of the embassy building, and the next he was walking directly toward Marcus with purposeful strides. His boots clicked against the marble floor of the embassy entrance with military precision, the sound echoing through the now silent hallway like a countdown to an unknown event. Embassy staff members, who had been moving about their duties with quiet efficiency, suddenly stopped what they were doing. Secretary Helen Morrison froze with a stack of documents halfway to her chest, her eyes wide with confusion. Junior diplomat Peter Chen looked up from his phone, sensing that the carefully orchestrated diplomatic routine was about to be disrupted. Even the usually bustling activity of the embassy ground to a halt as everyone sensed that something unexpected was about to happen. Ambassador Richardson stopped mid-sentence, his diplomatic smile faltering as he realized that the colonel's attention had shifted away from their conversation entirely. The ambassador's years of experience had taught him to recognize when a diplomatic situation was about to become complicated, and every instinct he possessed was now screaming warnings. "You there?" "British soldier," Colonel Jong said, in accented but clear English, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who had commanded troops in multiple theaters of operation. The words cut through the silence like a blade. "I am Colonel Jung, Way of the People's Liberation Army. You will salute me now." The request hung in the air like a challenge thrown down in an ancient duel. The colonel's tone wasn't merely commanding, it was testing, probing, as if he were deliberately pushing against the boundaries of acceptable diplomatic behavior to see what would happen. His junior officers, who had been following at a respectful distance, now stood frozen in place, clearly uncertain about their superior's unexpected deviation from protocol. Marcus felt every eye in the room turn toward him like spotlights suddenly blazing in his direction. The embassy staff held their breath collectively, waiting to see how he would respond to this unprecedented situation. Security Chief James Morton, who had been monitoring the delegation's arrival from a discreet distance, now stepped closer, his hand instinctively moving toward his communication device. The tension in the room was so thick it seemed almost tangible. Marcus maintained his composed expression, but beneath the surface, his mind was racing through his training, his protocols, and his standing orders. In his 12 years of service with the British Royal Guard, he had been taught that Royal Guards salute only specific individuals according to strict military hierarchy and protocol. The chain of command was sacred, inviolable. Foreign military officers, regardless of rank or reputation, were not included in those protocols unless specifically ordered by his British commanding officers. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, the quiet whispers of confused embassy staff, and the almost inaudible sound of Colonel Jung's steady breathing as the Chinese officer waited for compliance with his demand. Sir Marcus replied respectfully but firmly, his voice carrying the quiet strength that had earned him respect throughout his military career. "I follow British Royal Guard protocol. I salute according to my standing orders and military regulations." The response was delivered with perfect military courtesy. But the message was unmistakable. Marcus Williams would not be moved from his duty by foreign authority, regardless of the rank or reputation of the person making the demand. His words were chosen carefully, showing respect for Colonel Zhang as a fellow military officer, while making it clear that respect did not extend to abandoning his sworn obligations. The colonel's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, a carefully controlled mask of diplomatic courtesy slipped to reveal something harder and more dangerous underneath. He was clearly not accustomed to having his commands questioned or refused, especially not by a foreign soldier of lower rank. The muscles in his jaw tightened, and his hands, which had been clasped behind his back in a relaxed military stance, now clenched into fists. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch, as the two military men faced each other across a gulf that represented not just personal authority, but the fundamental differences between their nation's military traditions, cultural expectations, and concepts of duty and honor. Embassy staff members exchanged worried glances, their faces reflecting a mixture of confusion, concern, and growing alarm. This was definitely not covered in any of their diplomatic training manuals. Ambassador Richardson stepped forward, his diplomatic instincts finally overriding his shock at the unexpected turn of events. He attempted to diffuse the situation with the kind of carefully neutral language that diplomats use when trying to navigate between conflicting positions. Perhaps I could discuss the proper protocols for, the ambassador began, his voice carrying the practiced calm of someone who had spent decades mediating between competing interests and cultural differences. No, Colonel Zhang interrupted sharply, raising his hand to silence the ambassador with a gesture that was both commanding and dismissive. His attention remained fixed on Marcus like a laser beam, unwavering and intense. This British soldier shows disrespect to a senior Chinese military officer. In my country, such behavior would not be tolerated. It would be considered a grave insult, not only to me personally, but to the military traditions and honor of the People's Republic of China. The colonel's voice had taken on a harder edge, and his junior officers shifted nervously behind him, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating confrontation but unwilling to challenge their superior's authority. The diplomatic niceties that had characterized the first few minutes of the meeting were rapidly evaporating. Replaced by something much more dangerous and unpredictable, Marcus could feel sweat beginning to form under his ceremonial cap, but his military training kept him steady. The years of drill, discipline, and dedication to duty that had shaped him into the soldier he was today now served as his anchor in this unexpected storm. He knew that his response in this moment would reflect not only on himself, but on the entire British military, the Royal Guard, and by extension, his country's commitment to its principles and values. The weight of tradition, duty, and national pride pressed down on him like a physical force as he prepared to face whatever consequences his decision might bring. He thought of his grandfather, who had served with distinction in World War II, and had often told young Marcus stories about the importance of standing firm in the face of pressure and never compromising one's principles for temporary advantage or personal comfort. The standoff continued, with neither man willing to back down, their confrontation becoming a microcosm of larger tensions between nations, military traditions, and competing concepts of honor and respect. The embassy staff watched in growing alarm as what should have been a routine diplomatic meeting transformed into an international guest-gate incident that none of them knew how to resolve. And that could potentially have far-reaching consequences for British-Chinese relations. Asterisk. The silence stretched on like a taut wire ready to snap as Colonel Zhang Wei stared at Marcus Williams with growing irritation. The ornate embassy hallway, usually filled with the quiet bustle of diplomatic activity, had become an arena where two military traditions faced off against each other. Embassy staff members fidgeted nervously along the walls, unsure whether to intervene, flee, or simply bear witness to what was rapidly becoming an international incident of unprecedented proportions. Secretary Helen Morrison clutched her documents so tightly that her knuckles had turned white, while junior diplomat Peter Chen kept glancing between his phone and the confrontation as if hoping someone would text him the proper protocol for this situation. The usual comfortable atmosphere of the embassy had been replaced by tension so thick it seemed to press against everyone present like a physical weight. You dare to disobey a direct order from a colonel? Zhang's voice rose slightly, though he maintained his rigid military bearing. Every word was carefully enunciated, carrying the authority of someone who had commanded thousands of troops across multiple continents. In the People's Liberation Army, such insubordination would result in immediate disciplinary action. Court-martial proceedings would be initiated within hours. Such disrespect for military hierarchy is simply not tolerated in any professional army. The colonel's junior officers stood rigidly behind him, their faces showing a mixture of surprise and discomfort at witnessing their superior being refused by a foreign soldier. Lieutenant Chen Li, the youngest of the group, kept glancing nervously between his commanding officer and the immovable British guard, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating situation, but bound by military discipline to remain silent unless directly addressed. Captain Wu Ming, a more experienced officer with several peacekeeping missions under his belt, maintained his professional composure, but his eyes revealed his concern about where this confrontation might lead. The third officer, Major Lu Feng, had seen enough international incidents during his career to recognize that this situation was spiraling beyond normal diplomatic tensions into something that could have serious political ramifications. Marcus remained at attention, his military bearing impeccable despite the mounting pressure. His voice remained steady and respectful, carrying the quiet confidence that had earned him respect throughout his 12-year career. Colonel Zhang, with all due respect, I serve under British military protocol. I am not under Chinese command, and I follow the orders of my British superiors only. This is not disrespect toward you personally, sir, but adherence to my sworn duty as a member of Her Majesty's Royal Guard. The words were chosen carefully, delivered with the precision that had been drilled into him during years of training. Marcus understood that he was walking a diplomatic tightrope, trying to maintain respect for a foreign military officer while refusing to compromise the principles that defined his service. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. A soldier's word is his bond, Marcus. Once you swear an oath, you keep it no matter what the cost. The colonel's face flushed red with anger, the carefully controlled mask of military professionalism slipping to reveal the frustration of a man unaccustomed to having his authority questioned. His breathing became slightly more rapid, and the metals on his chest rose and fell with each breath like small tokens of his growing rage. Sworn duty? Colonel Zhang repeated, his voice carrying a note of incredulous disbelief. Your sworn duty is to show proper respect to visiting military officials. Your sworn duty is to represent your country with honor and courtesy. How is refusing to acknowledge the rank of a senior officer from an allied nation serving your sworn duty? He turned toward Ambassador Richardson, gesturing sharply at Marcus with movements that were becoming less controlled and more aggressive. This is how Britain shows respect to visiting Chinese military officials. Your soldier openly defies my rank and authority in your own embassy. In my country, such behavior would be seen as a deliberate diplomatic insult, a calculated attempt to undermine Chinese military prestige. Ambassador Richardson found himself caught in an impossible position between diplomatic necessity and military protocol. His decades of experience had taught him to navigate complex international situations. Now, this confrontation was unlike anything in his extensive career. He understood Marcus's position the captain was absolutely correct about. British military protocol, but he also knew that offending a senior Chinese military official could damage important trade negotiations, arms control agreements, and political relationships that had taken years to build. The trade deals currently under discussion were worth billions of pounds and could provide employment for hundreds of thousands of British workers. The diplomatic relationships at stake had taken decades to develop and could be destroyed in a matter of minutes. If this situation escalated further, the ambassador's mind raced through possible solutions, searching for a way to respect both military traditions while preserving the delicate balance of international diplomacy. Colonel Zhang, the ambassador, began carefully, his voice carrying the practiced calm of someone who had spent decades mediating between competing interests and cultural differences. Captain Williams is following standard British military protocol, which I'm sure you can appreciate as a professional soldier yourself. Perhaps we could find a compromise that respects both our military traditions while acknowledging the legitimate concerns you've raised. There is no compromise in military discipline. Colonel Zhang interrupted harshly, his patience clearly exhausted. His voice carried the finality of someone making a definitive statement rather than engaging in negotiation. Respect for rank is universal among professional armies worldwide. This guard insults not only me, but the entire Chinese military. The People's Liberation Army, and by extension, the People's Republic of China itself. The colonel's words hung in the air like an ultimatum, transforming what had begun as a personal confrontation into something with potentially far-reaching political implications. Embassy Security Chief James Morton stepped closer, his hand moving instinctively toward his communication device as he prepared to alert London about the developing crisis. The tension reached a critical point when Colonel Zhang stepped closer to Marcus. Close enough that their faces were only inches apart. The colonel had to look up slightly to meet Marcus's eyes. The British captain was taller by several inches, but his presence was formidable nonetheless. The colonel's voice dropped to a threatening whisper that could still be heard throughout the silent hallway, each word delivered with the precision of a blade. British soldier, I give you one final opportunity to show proper military courtesy. Salute me now, or face the consequences of your disrespect. This incident will be reported directly to Beijing through official channels. I assure you that your ambassador will receive formal complaints about your behavior. Your superiors in London will be informed of your failure to maintain proper diplomatic relations. The threat was clear and specific. Refuse to comply, and face not only the anger of a senior Chinese military official, but potential diplomatic repercussions that could affect Marcus's career, his unit's reputation, and broader British-Chinese relations. The colonel's junior officers watched with growing alarm as their superior pushed the confrontation to its absolute limit. Marcus felt his heart pounding against his ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom, but his resolve remained as solid as granite. The years of training, the countless hours of drill and ceremony, the deep understanding of what it meant to serve in the Royal Guard, all of this had prepared him for exactly this moment. He thought of every Royal Guard who had come before him. Men who had faced enemy fire, terrorist threats, and diplomatic crises without ever compromising their principles or abandoning their duty. He thought of his grandfather's stories about standing guard during the London Blitz, when German bombs were falling all around but the guards never left their posts. He thought of the Royal Guards who had served in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, maintaining their duties despite constant threat of attack. He thought of his own oath of service, the solemn promise he had made to serve with honor, courage, and unwavering dedication to duty. Colonel Zhang Marcus replied with quiet dignity that seemed to fill the entire hallway, his voice carrying the strength of conviction that comes from knowing absolutely that one is doing the right thing. I understand your position, and I mean no personal disrespect to you, your service record, or your country. However, I cannot and will not disobey British military regulations, regardless of the consequences that may follow. My duty's clear, sir, and I will not abandon it. The words were delivered with such calm certainty that they seemed to create their own space in the tense atmosphere of the embassy hallway. Marcus's response carried the weight of centuries of military tradition, the unbreakable bond between a soldier and his sworn oath, and the kind of moral courage that distinguishes true professionals from those who merely wear the uniform. The colonel's face turned an even deeper shade of red with rage, his composure finally cracking under the pressure of being defied by someone he clearly considered his inferior. He spun around to face his own officers, speaking rapidly in Chinese, his words sharp and angry. The junior officers looked shocked and uncertain, glancing nervously between their furious superior and the unmovable British Guard who had just defied one of China's most decorated and respected military leaders. Lieutenant Chen Li's face showed particular distress, as if he understood something about the situation that the others missed. Captain Wu Ming maintained his military bearing, but his eyes revealed deep concern about where this confrontation was heading. Major Lu Feng watched his commanding officer with the careful attention of someone trying to anticipate what might happen next in an increasingly volatile situation. The embassy staff pressed themselves against the walls, afraid to move or speak as the diplomatic crisis reached its peak. Ambassador Richardson's face had gone pale as he realized that his carefully planned meeting was dissolving into chaos. Security Chief Morton had his communication device in his hand, ready to alert London about what might soon become an international incident requiring emergency diplomatic intervention. What happened next would surprise everyone in the embassy, and forever change how both countries viewed this unexpected diplomatic crisis that had erupted from what should have been a routine ceremonial. Greeting Colonel Zhang Wei turned back to face Marcus after his heated exchange with his officers, his anger now barely contained beneath the surface of military discipline. The ornate embassy hallway had become completely silent except for the sound of the colonel's heavy breathing and the almost inaudible whispers of terrified embassy staff, members who pressed themselves against the walls like spectators at a gladiatorial contest they never wanted to witness. The morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows created dramatic shadows across the marble floor, making the confrontation appear almost theatrical in its intensity. Secretary Helen Morrison had abandoned any pretense of continuing her work and stood frozen with her documents pressed against her chest like a shield. Junior diplomat Peter Chen kept his phone in his hand but seemed to have forgotten its existence entirely. Mesmerized by the unprecedented diplomatic crisis unfolding before his eyes, "You have made your choice, British soldier," Colonel Zhang said through gritted teeth, each word delivered with the precision of a military report but carrying the weight of personal, front, and professional disappointment. "You will regret this insult to China, to the People's Liberation Army, and to me personally. This matter will not end here in this hallway." The colonel's junior officers maintained their rigid positions, but their faces showed a complex mixture of emotions. Lieutenant Chen Li appeared particularly distressed, his youthful features reflecting an internal struggle that seemed to go beyond mere concern about his superior's anger. Captain Wu Ming kept glancing between the colonel and Marcus, as if he were watching a chess match, where he could see moves that others were missing. Major Lu Feng maintained his professional composure, but his eyes held the calculating look of someone who had witnessed similar tests before and understood their true purpose. But then something unexpected happened that would change the entire trajectory of the confrontation. Lieutenant Chen Li, despite the enormous risk of interrupting his superior during such a heated moment, stepped forward with the careful precision of someone who understood they were about to either save the situation or destroy their own career. The young officer's movement was so subtle that most of the embassy staff didn't even notice it. But Colonel Zheng's trained eye caught it immediately. "Colonel Zheng," Sir Lieutenant Chen said quietly in Chinese, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying an urgency that demanded attention. The conversation that followed was brief but intense, conducted in rapid Mandarin that none of the British personnel could understand but whose emotional tenor was unmistakable. The lieutenant gestured respectfully but persistently toward Marcus, his words seeming to carry some kind of explanation or argument that gradually began to shift the colonel's expression from rage to something more complex. The exchange lasted perhaps 30 seconds, but to everyone watching, it felt like an eternity. Ambassador Richardson found himself holding his breath, hoping desperately that whatever the young Chinese officer was saying might somehow diffuse the crisis that threatened to explode into an international incident. Security Chief Morton had his finger poised over his communication device, ready to alert London the moment the situation deteriorated beyond recovery. Colonel Zhang's expression shifted slowly from rage to confusion, then to something that looked almost like curiosity. The transformation was subtle, but unmistakable to anyone who understood military bearing and facial expressions. The colonel's rigid posture relaxed slightly, his clenched fists opened, and his eyes took on the analytical quality of a professional soldier reassessing a tactical situation based on new intelligence. He studied Marcus more carefully now, taking in every detail of the guard's uniform posture and demeanor with the methodical attention of someone conducting a formal military inspection. The colonel's gaze moved from Marcus's polished boots to his perfectly pressed uniform. From his unwavering stance to his calm, respectful expression, it was as if Zhang were seeing the British captain for the first time, evaluating him not as an obstacle to his authority, but as a fellow professional soldier, worthy of closer examination. After a long moment that seemed to stretch into infinity, Colonel Zhang asked a question that surprised everyone present, his voice carrying a new tone that was more investigative than confrontational. "British soldier, what is your name and rank?" The question hung in the air like a completely unexpected plot twist in a story that everyone thought they understood. Marcus maintained his respectful posture, but seemed slightly surprised by the sudden shift in the colonel's approach. The embassy staff exchanged confused glances, uncertain whether this represented progress toward resolution or simply a new phase of the confrontation. "Captain Marcus?" "Williams, sir," Marcus replied, maintaining the same respectful tone he had used throughout the encounter. Despite the dramatic change in the colonel's demeanor, "Captain Williams," the colonel said slowly, as if testing the words on his tongue and finding them somehow significant. His voice had lost much of its earlier anger, replaced by what sounded almost like professional interest. "How long have you served in your royal guard?" The question seemed innocent enough, but something in the colonel's tone suggested that it was anything but casual conversation. Marcus considered his response carefully, sensing that this interrogation had some purpose beyond simple curiosity about his military background. 12 years. "Sir." Colonel Zhang nodded thoughtfully, his expression continuing to evolve from anger toward something that looked increasingly like professional assessment. He walked a few steps away from Marcus, his hands clasped behind his back in the traditional military stance, then returned with measured steps that suggested deep contemplation. Rather than aggressive confrontation, the colonel's junior officers watched this transformation with varying degrees of surprise and relief. Lieutenant Chen Li's face showed particular satisfaction, as if his intervention had achieved exactly the result he had hoped for. Captain Wu Ming maintained his professional composure, but his posture suggested that he was beginning to understand what was really happening. Major Lu Feng nodded almost imperceptibly, as if confirming some internal assessment of the situation. "In those 12 years, Captain Williams," Colonel Zhang continued, his voice now carrying the tone of one military professional addressing another, rather than a superior officer berating a subordinate, "have you ever compromised your military protocols for any reason? Have you ever abandoned your standing orders because of pressure from foreign authorities, threats to your career, or promises of personal advancement?" The question struck at the heart of military integrity, touching on the fundamental principles that separate professional soldiers from those who merely wear uniforms. Marcus understood that his answer would reveal not just his personal character, but his understanding of what true military service meant. "No, sir. Never," Marcus replied without hesitation, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone stating an absolute truth rather than making a claim he hoped would be believed, not even when threatened with punishment, career consequences, or diplomatic complications. The colonel pressed, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face as he searched for any sign of uncertainty or deception. "No, sir. My duty comes first, regardless of personal cost." The colonel fell silent for nearly a minute, studying Marcus with the trained eye of an experienced military leader who had spent decades evaluating soldiers from multiple countries and military traditions. The embassy staff watched in bewilderment as the atmosphere in the room began to shift in an unexpected direction, the confrontational tension gradually being replaced by something that felt more like professional assessment than diplomatic crisis. Embassy Security Chief Morton slowly lowered his communication device, sensing that the immediate danger of international incident might be passing. Ambassador Richardson allowed himself to breathe normally for the first time since the confrontation began, though he remained ready to intervene if the situation took another unexpected turn. Finally, Colonel Zhang spoke again, his voice now carrying a tone of respect that had been completely absent during the earlier confrontation. "Captain Williams, I have served in the Chinese military for 25 years. In that time, I have met many soldiers from many countries, participated in joint exercises with NATO forces, served alongside peacekeeping troops from 6 continents, and observed military personnel in combat, training, and diplomatic situations, the colonel paused, his expression becoming almost reflective as he continued. Most soldiers, when faced with pressure from foreign authority, will bend their principles to avoid conflict. Most will choose personal safety, career advancement, or diplomatic convenience over strict adherence to their military codes. Most will find ways to rationalize compromise when the alternative appears to be professional or personal cost. Marcus remained silent, unsure where this analysis was leading, but recognizing that something fundamental had shifted in the inn. Colonel's approach to their encounter: "You have refused a direct order from a foreign colonel, knowing it could create an international incident that might affect your career and your country's diplomatic relationships," John continued, his voice carrying growing respect. "You have maintained your position despite threats, pressure, and the obvious displeasure of a senior military officer from an important allied nation. You have shown absolute loyalty to your military code and your sworn oath of service." The colonel paused again, his expression now showing something that looked unmistakably like admiration rather than anger. "This tells me something very important about your character, your training, and the quality of the military tradition you represent, Lieutenant." Chenli watched his superior with obvious relief and pride, as if he had hoped for exactly this turn of events. The young officer's intervention had apparently been based on his recognition of something in the situation that others had missed. Captain Wu Ming and Major Lu Feng exchanged meaningful glances, suggesting that they, too, understood the significance of what was happening. Ambassador Richardson looked confused but cautiously hopeful that the crisis might be resolving itself in a way that none of them had anticipated. The embassy staff began to relax slightly, sensing that the immediate danger of diplomatic disaster might be passing, although they remained uncertain about what would happen next. What Colonel Zhang said and did next would shock everyone present and transform a potential diplomatic disaster into something that none of them had ever experienced, or even imagined possible in the formal world of international relations. Colonel Zhang Wei straightened his uniform with deliberate precision, adjusting his medals and rank insignia as if preparing for a formal ceremony. The entire embassy seemed to hold its breath in collective anticipation as the Chinese officer prepared to speak. The morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows created an almost ethereal atmosphere, casting golden rays across the marble floor and illuminating the faces of everyone present. What he said next left every person in the hallway completely stunned, their expectations shattered like glass hitting stone. "Captain Williams," the colonel said, in a clear, respectful voice that carried none of the anger or confrontation that had characterized his earlier words, "I owe you a sincere and heartfelt apology." The words seemed to echo through the embassy corridor like a thunderclap in a clear sky. Gasps of astonishment rippled through the assembled crowd of embassy staff members, diplomats, and security personnel. Secretary Helen Morrison's carefully organized documents scattered to the floor as her hands flew to cover her mouth in shock. Junior diplomat Peter Chin's phone clattered against the marble as he nearly dropped it in disbelief. Ambassador Richardson's eyes widened to an almost comical degree, his diplomatic training utterly failing to prepare him for this unprecedented turn of events. Even the colonel's own junior officers showed visible surprise, though Lieutenant Chenli's expression suggested that he had hoped for exactly this outcome. Captain Wu Ming and Major Lu Feng maintained their military bearing, but their faces reflected a mixture of pride in their superior's wisdom and relief that the crisis was taking an expected positive turn. Colonel Zhang continued, his tone now filled with genuine professional respect and what sounded remarkably like admiration. "What I did was deliberately designed to test your character, your training, and your commitment to your military principles. It was a calculated examination of your integrity under pressure. And you, Captain Williams, have passed that test with the highest possible marks." The colonel began to pace slowly in front of Marcus, his movements now relaxed and confident rather than aggressive and confrontational. His hands were clasped behind his back in the traditional military stance, and his voice took on the quality of a senior officer delivering a formal assessment of a subordinate's performance. In my 25 years of military service, spanning multiple continents, conflicts, and peacekeeping missions, I have learned that the true measure of a soldier is not how he behaves when following orders is easy and convenient, but how he responds when maintaining his principles requires courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to face serious consequences. The embassy staff listened in rapt attention, still struggling to process the dramatic transformation of what they had thought was a diplomatic crisis into something entirely different. The tension that had filled the hallway like a toxic gas was rapidly dissipating, replaced by a sense of wonder and growing understanding of what they had actually witnessed. A true professional soldier. Colonel Jung continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen combat, commanded troops in hostile territory, and earned respect through decades of exemplary service. Never abandons his duty, his oath, or his sworn obligations, even under the most intense pressure from foreign authority. You demonstrated exactly that quality of character that I was testing. For the colonel turned to address Ambassador Richardson and the gathered embassy staff, his expression now open and almost educational, like a professor explaining a complex concept to attentive students. In China, we have profound respect for soldiers who cannot be corrupted, intimidated, or swayed from their duty by threats, promises, or pressure from any source. Captain Williams has demonstrated these qualities in the most convincing way possible. Marcus remained at attention, but inside he felt a mixture of relief, confusion, and growing understanding of what had just occurred. The confrontation that had seemed so threatening and potentially career-ending was revealing itself to be something entirely different, to test that he had unknowingly taken and apparently passed with flying colors, you see. Colonel Zhang explained to the astonished audience of diplomats and embassy personnel. In my years of international military cooperation, I have encountered many foreign soldiers who would salute anyone with higher rank, regardless of their own military protocols or standing orders. They do this to avoid conflict, to curry favor with foreign officers, or simply because they believe that compliance is always easier than confrontation. The colonel's voice took on a harder edge as he continued his explanation. But such soldiers, while they may appear cooperative and diplomatic in the moment, cannot be trusted when truly difficult decisions must be made. A soldier who will abandon his principles for convenience today will abandon his comrades, his mission, or his country tomorrow when the pressure becomes too great. Lieutenant Chen Li stepped forward slightly, his youthful face showing obvious pride in his commanding officer's wisdom and in the successful resolution of what could have been a serious diplomatic incident. The young officer had clearly understood something about the situation from the beginning that others had missed, and his intervention had been crucial in helping the colonel transition from the testing phase to the explanation phase of his assessment. A soldier who will not bend his principles for a foreign colonel will not bend them for an enemy. Commander Zhang continued, his voice now carrying the weight of hard-earned battlefield wisdom. Such a man can be trusted to defend his post, protect his charges, and maintain his duty no matter what pressures, threats, or inducements he faces. This is the kind of soldier that any professional military officer learns to recognize and respect. The colonel walked closer to Marcus, but this time his approach carried respect rather than confrontation. When he extended his hand toward the British captain, the gesture was one of genuine military fellowship rather than diplomatic necessity. Captain Williams, it would be my sincere honor to shake hands with a man of such unwavering integrity and professional dedication. Your performance today has impressed me greatly, and I want you to know that your refusal to compromise your principles has earned you my deepest respect. Marcus, still processing the dramatic reversal of the situation, accepted the handshake with quiet dignity. The firm grip and direct eye contact between the two military professionals spoke of mutual recognition and respect that transcended national boundaries, cultural differences, and language barriers. "Thank you, Colonel Zhang," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the emotional whirlwind of the past few minutes. Your test was certainly unexpected, but I understand now that it served an important purpose. I appreciate your recognition of my commitment to duty." Ambassador Richardson stepped forward, his relief evident in every line of his face and every word he spoke. The diplomat had spent decades navigating complex international situations. But this morning's events had pushed him far beyond his normal experience and comfort zone. "Colonel Jung," the ambassador said, his voice carrying genuine appreciation mixed with residual amazement at the morning's events. "Your approach was certainly unconventional. And I must admit that for a few minutes there, I was seriously concerned about the potential diplomatic ramifications of what seemed to be developing into a serious international incident. However, I deeply appreciate your recognition of Captain Williams' dedication to duty and professional integrity." The colonel nodded respectfully to the ambassador, acknowledging both the diplomat's concerns and his gracious acceptance of the unusual testing procedure. "Mr. Ambassador, I apologize for the stress this test may have caused you and your staff. However, I believe that understanding the true character of the military personnel responsible for embassy security is crucial for building trust and cooperation between our nations." The colonel turned back to Marcus one final time, his expression now showing the kind of respect that one professional warrior shows to another who has proven himself worthy of recognition. "Captain Williams, in my country, we have an ancient saying, 'The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire, and the truest soldier is revealed under the greatest pressure.' Today, you have proven that British Royal Guards are indeed made of very strong steel, as the immediate tension dissolved completely. Embassy staff members began to relax and whisper among themselves about the extraordinary scene they had just witnessed. Secretary Helen Morrison bent to retrieve her scattered documents, shaking her head in amazement. Junior diplomat Peter Chen checked his phone, as if confirming that the morning's events had actually happened and weren't some kind of elaborate dream or hallucination. Security Chief James Morton slowly holstered his communication device, making a mental note to include this incident in his next report to London, though he wondered if anyone would actually believe what had transpired in the embassy hallway that morning. But Colonel Zhang was not finished with his surprises, and what he did next would create a moment that everyone present would remember and discuss for the rest of their careers. A gesture so unexpected and meaningful that it would become legendary in both British and Chinese military circles, as the handshake between Colonel Zhang Wei and Captain Marcus Williams ended. A profound sense of mutual respect filled the embassy hallway. The morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows seemed to illuminate not just the marble floors and ornate decorations, but the faces of everyone present, all of whom were still processing the dramatic transformation they had just witnessed. The tension that had gripped the building like a vice was completely gone, replaced by an atmosphere of wonder and growing appreciation for what had actually transpired. But Colonel Zhang Wei was not finished with his surprises. As he took a step back from Marcus, the decorated Chinese military officer, with his 25 years of distinguished service, his numerous combat decorations, and his reputation as one of China's most respected military leaders, did something that left every person in the embassy utterly speechless and forever changed their understanding of what true military honor looked like. The colonel straightened to his full height, his posture becoming even more rigid and formal than it had been throughout the entire encounter. His expression took on the solemn dignity of someone about to perform a sacred military ritual. Then, with movements so precise they seemed choreographed, Colonel Zhang Wei raised his right hand in a crisp, perfect military salute directed at Captain Marcus Williams. The sight was absolutely extraordinary, unprecedented in the experience of everyone present. A full colonel in the People's Liberation Army, a senior officer who outranked Marcus by several grades, a decorated veteran of multiple international conflicts, was saluting a British Royal Guard captain in front of an audience of diplomats, embassy staff, and his own subordinate officers. The gesture went against every military hierarchy and protocol that anyone present. The embassy staff stood frozen in absolute amazement, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. Ambassador Richardson's mouth fell open in complete shock, his diplomatic training providing no framework for understanding such an unprecedented display of respect across military and national boundaries. Secretary Helen Morrison had been gathering her scattered documents, but she stopped mid-motion and remained crouched on the floor, staring upward at the scene with wide eyes. Junior diplomat Peter Chen held his phone halfway to his ear, having apparently forgotten that he had been about to make a call. Security Chief James Morton stood with his hand still near his communication device, his expression reflecting the awe of someone witnessing something that he knew would be talked about and analyzed for years, too. "Come, Colonel Zhang," Marcus said quietly, his voice filled with surprise and profound respect. "Sir." "You don't need to, Captain Williams," the colonel interrupted gently, maintaining his perfect salute while speaking with the formal dignity befitting such a momentous occasion. "In China, we have military traditions that extend back thousands of years. One of our most sacred principles is that we salute those who have earned our deepest respect through their actions, their character, and their unwavering commitment to honor." The colonel's voice carried the weight of ancient tradition and personal conviction as he continued. "Today, you have demonstrated the kind of integrity, courage, and devotion to duty that transcends rank, nationality, and military service. You have shown that true honor recognizes no boundaries except those of character and principle." Marcus, understanding the profound significance of what was happening and the extraordinary honor being shown to him, returned the salute with equal precision and dignity. For a long moment that seemed to extend into eternity, the two soldiers from different countries, different military traditions, and different cultures stood in perfect military bearing, acknowledging each other as brothers in honor, duty, and the timeless values that unite professional warriors across all boundaries. The sight was so moving that several embassy staff members felt tears forming in their eyes. Lieutenant Chen Li watched with obvious pride, understanding that his commanding officer was demonstrating the highest form of military leadership by recognizing excellence regardless of nationality. Captain Wu Ming and Major Lu Feng stood at rigid attention, bearing witness to a moment that they knew would become part of military legend. When the salutes ended, Colonel Zhang addressed not just Marcus, but everyone present in the hallway. "Let this moment serve as a lesson to all who witnessed it. True strength in a military officer is not found in demanding respect from others, but in earning that respect through your own actions and principles. True leadership is not about forcing compliance, but about recognizing and honoring excellence wherever it may be found." The colonel's words carried the authority of someone who had commanded troops in hostile territory, made life-and-death decisions under the most extreme pressure, and earned every medal, ribbon, and commendation that decorated his uniform through personal sacrifice and professional excellence. "Captain Williams has shown us all what it means to be an honorable soldier," Zhang continued, his voice now carrying the warmth of genuine admiration. "He has demonstrated that the bonds of military honor are stronger than the boundaries between nations, and that respect must be earned rather than simply demanded." Ambassador Richardson, finally recovering from his shock, managed to find his diplomatic voice. "Colonel Zhang, your recognition of Captain Williams' integrity and your demonstration of such profound respect will not be forgotten. This is exactly the kind of mutual understanding and appreciation that should guide all relationships between our countries." Both military and diplomatic, the colonel smiled the first time he had shown any real warmth since arriving at the embassy. The expression transformed his entire appearance from that of a stern military commander to something more approachable and human. "Mr. Ambassador, when soldiers can respect and honor each other across national boundaries, diplomats find their work much easier and more productive." As the group prepared to move toward the formal meeting rooms where the day's diplomatic business would be conducted, Colonel Zhang paused beside Marcus one final time. The atmosphere had completely transformed from the confrontational tension of an hour earlier to something that felt almost festive, as if everyone present understood that they had witnessed something truly special and historically significant. "Captain Williams," the colonel said, in a voice that carried both warmth and profound respect, "I have met generals and field marshals who lack your strength of character and commitment to principle. your country, your military service, and the institution of the Royal Guard should be immensely proud to have soldiers of your caliber representing them. Thank you, Colonel, Marcus replied, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had been tested under the most intense pressure and had emerged with his honor intact, and his principles uncompromised. Your test taught me something important as well. True honor recognizes true honor, regardless of the uniform it wears or the flag it serves under. The formal diplomatic meeting that followed was more successful than anyone had dared hope when the day began. The mutual respect and understanding established in the embassy hallway carried over into the negotiations, creating an atmosphere of trust, cooperation, and genuine partnership that benefited both countries enormously. The trade agreements that were finalized that day were more comprehensive and mutually beneficial than either side had expected, and the political relationships that were strengthened would endure for years to come. Later that evening, as the Chinese delegation prepared to depart for the airport, Colonel Zhang sought out Marcus once more. The embassy was quieter now. The formal meetings concluded, the documents signed, and the diplomatic protocols satisfied. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving only essential personnel to handle the departure logistics. The colonel approached Marcus with something in his hand, a small, ornate box that clearly contained something of great personal significance. Captain Williams, he said with the solemnity of someone about to perform a sacred ritual, I want to offer you something that I hope you will accept as a symbol of the respect you have earned. Today, Zhang opened the box to reveal one of his personal military medals, a commendation for outstanding service and exceptional courage under fire that he had earned during a particularly dangerous peacekeeping mission in Africa several years earlier. The medal gleamed in the embassy's evening lighting, its ribbon bright with the colors of Chinese military honor. I cannot accept that, sir, Marcus said respectfully, understanding both the honor being offered and the magnitude of such a gesture. You earned that medal through your own service, your own courage, and your own sacrifices. It belongs with you. The colonel smiled with genuine warmth, his expression reflecting both understanding and determination. Captain Williams, honor shared is honor multiplied, and respect acknowledged is respect strengthened. In my country, we believe that when we recognize excellence in others, we honor not only them but the principles and values that make such excellence possible. Zhang extended the medal toward Marcus with both hands in a gesture that carried the weight of ancient tradition and personal conviction. Please accept this as a symbol of the bond between professional soldiers who serve their countries with integrity. Regardless of the flags they follow or the uniforms they wear, Marcus, deeply moved by the unprecedented gesture and understanding its profound significance, accepted the medal with equal solemnity. In return, he removed one of his own service pins, a commendation for 12 years of exemplary service in the Royal Guard, and offered it to Colonel Zhang. 4. The officer who taught me that testing can be the highest form of respect, Marcus said, and that true leadership recognizes excellence wherever it may be found. Regardless of rank or nationality, the exchange was witnessed by Lieutenant Chen Li, who had remained behind to assist with departure logistics, and Ambassador Richardson, who had come to bid farewell to the Chinese delegation. Both men understood that they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple exchange of military decorations. They were seeing the creation of a bond that would endure long after the diplomatic meetings were forgotten. Years later, both Colonel Zhang Wei and Captain Marcus Williams would tell the story of their encounter to other soldiers, junior officers, and military academy students, emphasizing the importance of staying true to one's principles under pressure, the value of testing character rather than simply assuming it, and the power of recognizing excellence across all boundaries of nationality, rank, and service. The incident became legendary in both British and Chinese military circles as an example of how honor and respect can bridge any gap between nations when they are demonstrated by individuals who understand that true military virtue transcends politics, nationalism, and personal ambition. Military historians would later write about the embassy encounter as a perfect illustration of how professional soldiers can create understanding and cooperation even in the midst of broader political tensions. The embassy staff never forgot the day they witnessed what began as a confrontation to transform into a celebration of military virtue, proving that sometimes the most shocking and unexpected moments reveal the most beautiful truths about human character, professional integrity, and the timeless bonds that unite honorable people across all boundaries and differences. The medal that Colonel John gave to Marcus became one of his most treasured possessions, not because of its material value or even its military significance, but because it represented recognition from a fellow professional warrior who had tested him and found him worthy of respect. Similarly, the service pin that Marcus gave to Zhang held a place of honor in the colonel's personal collection, serving as a reminder of the day he met a British soldier whose integrity could not be shaken by any pressure or threat. Both men carried the memory of their encounter throughout the remainder of their military careers, and both used the lessons learned that day to guide their leadership of younger soldiers who faced their own tests of character and commitment to duty. The story of the Royal Guard who refused to salute became more than just an anecdote. It became a teaching tool for demonstrating the importance of principled leadership, the value of testing character under pressure, and the extraordinary things that can happen when honor recognizes honor across all boundaries.